Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Bai Xiaochun fell back, cursing the spirit automaton the entire time, his heart overflowing with waves of rage. Were it not for the fact that he couldn't do anything to the automaton, he definitely would have skinned him alive. "I hate you," he shouted, sounding very dispirited. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man took another step forward, and thrust his fist out again. In response, the sky turned dark, and immense pressure weighed down in the area. A massive tempest rose up with this fist strike, and although it seemed slightly weaker than before, it still contained the power of an Archean. As the fist struck out, mountain-toppling, sea-draining force was unleashed directly toward Bai Xiaochun. The air shattered, and the heaven and earth that made up this world seemed to tremble on the verge of collapsing into smoke. Bai Xiaochun let out a yelp. Considering what was happening, he knew he had no other options. As the tempest that was the fist strike closed in, he threw his arms up and then shoved them down toward the ground. Even as the wind buffeted his face, he shouted, "Water Swamp Kingdom!" Rumbling sounds echoed out, shaking the entire palace, sending out rippling fluctuations in all directions. At the same time, the entire world transformed into a watery swamp. Water vapor rose up, along with a howl that seemed to echo from primeval times. Moments later, numerous spikes began to rise up. The Water Swamp Kingdom, one of Bai Xiaochun's most powerful trump cards, was making its entrance. Rumbling sounds filled the world as what appeared to be mountain peaks rose high into the air. The roaring sound continued, and in the blink of an eye, the Archean fist strike slammed into the Water Swamp Kingdom. The boom that resulted shook the world with violent convulsions. As for the spikes and mountain peaks of the Water Swamp Kingdom, they seemed incapable of standing up to the Archean fist strike, and in fact, the entire summoning effect appeared to be on the verge of ending. But just as the Water Swamp Kingdom seemed to be on the verge of completely collapsing, a defiant roar filled the air that surpassed anything from before. As of this moment, Bai Xiaochun was using the Water Swamp Kingdom again. A second time in a row. Roar. Two land masses appeared to be rising up, covered with numerous mountains. Shockingly, they were like teeth. And the two land masses were the enormous jaws of Bai Xiaochun's life essence spirit. It was like some sort of crocodilian beast from the most ancient of times, brutal to the extreme as it shot toward the tempest that was the Archean fist strike. The world shook on the verge of collapse. Unfortunately, Bai Xiaochun did not have an Archean cultivation base, and therefore, despite how strong his Water Swamp Kingdom was, his cultivation base was having a difficult time supporting it. A defiant howl echoed out as the Water Swamp Kingdom faded away completely. The tempest of the Archean level fist strike then continued onward toward Bai Xiaochun. However, for some unknown reason, this fist strike was much weaker than the previous one, and after its clash with the Water Swamp Kingdom, was weakening even further. There was no time for Bai Xiaochun to sit around thinking and planning. After his Water Swamp Kingdom was gone, he howled, unleashing the explosive power of his fleshly body, and also rotating his cultivation base. Suddenly, his heaven-span Dharma eye opened up, sending dazzling violet light cascading out. Simultaneously, his turtle walk appeared in front of him again. Although all of this takes a bit of time to describe, it actually happened in the blink of an eye. And then, the Archean level fist strike arrived. Bai Xiaochun's fleshly body was flayed to the point of being ripped to shreds, and his cultivation base teetered on the verge of complete collapse. Blood sprayed out of his mouth as the violet light of the heaven-span Dharma eye met the fist strike. The final obstacle was the turtle walk. A massive bang filled the air, causing the world to shudder as Bai Xiaochun was flung backward like a kite with its string cut. His 5 yin organs and 6 yang organs were nearly destroyed, and his powers of regeneration were working in overdrive to keep up. However, the fist strike was not over yet, and Bai Xiaochun continued to fly backward. Even though the fist strike had been weakened, it was still terrifyingly powerful. Bai Xiaochun had summoned the turtle walk prematurely, and therefore, after sustaining the dreadful strike, it didn't even return to him. Instead, it spun off to the side, where it was swept up by a soft, gentle light. That light came from none other than the spirit automaton. Shocked, the spirit automaton shouted, "If you can get past the level after this, Bai Xiaochun, then I'll bow my head to you immediately." "Bow your head? You just wait, bitch." Bai Xiaochun ground to a halt, a profound sensation of deadly crisis filling him. After all, the tempest of the fist strike was still heading in his direction. "Time to go for broke," he shouted. Instead of backing up, he used the mountain-shaking bash. But that wasn't all. He picked up speed with the undying hex, simultaneously clenching his hand into a fist. Undying Emperor's fist, he shouted at the top of his lungs. Instantly, the huge image of a shadowy emperor appeared behind him. By this point, he had no idea how many multiples of the original fist strike this equated to. But he held nothing back, becoming a shooting star that headed directly toward the opposing fist strike. Deafening rumbling filled the shaking world. The huge palace complex couldn't withstand the force, and began to collapse, until the only thing that remained floating there was the huge statue. As for the tempest of the fist strike, it had been weakened over and over again, and even as it dissipated for the final time, it slammed directly into him. Bai Xiaochun had no clue how many mouthfuls of blood he had coughed up. He just knew that a power was descending on him that could wipe him out of existence. In that moment of crisis, he unleashed his godkiller technique. A mist of blood surrounded him as he shot away. However, the destructive power of the fist strike had connected, and could not be dispersed. It swept through him, dispersed, then reconverged again to batter him with incredible force. This happened a total of 8 times before the power was finally gone. At that point, Bai Xiaochun began to laugh loudly. I passed the level. Impossible, the spirit automaton blurted, completely aghast. He had done everything he could think of to prevent Bai Xiaochun from passing the level. And yet, despite the incredible level of difficulty, Bai Xiaochun had still succeeded. And this time, he had done it without the help of the turtle walk in the final moment. Even with that turtle walk, most other celestials would have been destroyed. It was such an astonishing turn of events that, at long last, a bit of admiration for Bai Xiaochun rose up in the heart of the spirit automaton. But then he thought about his future fate, and defiantly shouted, "You must swear an oath right now, here in the presence of the sovereign, that you won't change my surname after becoming my lord and master." "Say what?" Bai Xiaochun murmured, a look of shock appearing on his face. Swear it. Considering all of the things the spirit automaton had done to him throughout all the levels, Bai Xiaochun simply glared and replied, "Screw off. You think I'm an idiot? I'm not swearing anything. In fact, I'm definitely going to change your surname." Aarggggghhhhhhh. How could Bai Xiaochun have ever realized that his response would provoke the spirit automaton in such a way? Suddenly, the middle-aged man who had unleashed the devastating fist strikes stepped forward again and clenched his hand into a fist. Bai Xiaochun's eyes nearly popped out of his skull. If the man unleashed another strike, then it would be too devastating to survive. He immediately opened his mouth to try to pacify the spirit automaton. However, that was when the figure which had been sitting within the alcove in the forehead of the huge statue slowly stood up. Then, a voice could be heard which echoed like heavenly thunder, filling the world with somber dignity. "Enough, Shao Kai. Challenger, you have passed the level." As the voice echoed out into the world of the level, it seemed to supersede natural law itself. All of the dust and ruins that had been strewn about in the area suddenly seemed to pass through countless tens upon tens of thousands of years. In the blink of an eye, they turned into absolutely nothing. The sky was no longer clear, but rather, murky and gray, and the lands vanished as though by means of the passage of innumerable years, leaving nothing but a gaping void. Only the statue of the sovereign remained. Apparently, it wouldn't change in the least no matter how much time passed, as though it were something completely eternal. Shaken, Bai Xiaochun began to pant. Never could he have imagined that a spoken word could cause such profound changes. It was as if heaven and earth had been turned upside down, and a plethora of years had passed by in the briefest of moments. Even more unimaginable was the idea of what would happen if a similar thing happened to a cultivator. It was a terrifying notion. Even a powerful Archean would likely become nothing more than ash. A sovereign. So this is what sovereigns are like. Bai Xiaochun felt like a new world had been opened up to him. As for the spirit automaton, he trembled as he flopped down to kowtow, eyes shining with reverence. Deeper in his eyes, there was longing and sorrow. As the voice of the sovereign continued to thrum in the area, the figure in the alcove took a step forward, and began to approach Bai Xiaochun. As he did, black lightning filled the sky above, along with thunderous rumblings. From what Bai Xiaochun could tell, each lightning bolt seemed capable of destroying the tempest caused by the Archean fist strike moments ago. And he was right. Any one of those lightning bolts would cause even an Archean to flinch in fear. As of this moment, the image of that sovereign became the sole, most important entity in all existence. And yet, there was more. As the sovereign approached, corpses began to rise up from within the depths of the world. There were so many that they were impossible to count, their flesh tattered and gory, their eyes filled with the despair and blankness that would arise in the last moment before death. Although these corpses were clearly dead, their auras were those of celestials and Archeans. Bai Xiaochun even spotted some enormous giants who, in their moments before death, had been struggling to rise from kneeling positions but had failed. Bai Xiaochun was deeply shaken, both by the lightning and by all of the corpses. It was at this point that the image of the sovereign, not having reached Bai Xiaochun, spoke, his voice echoing to fill the entire world. You have passed the 99th level. Now, there is only one level left. His voice crashed like thunder, filling the world with immense pressure. Bai Xiaochun stood there shivering, his flesh, blood, and bones creaking and grinding from the terrifying weight pushing down on him. He was like a rowboat in an angry sea, so weak and powerless that the sovereign could turn him to ash with a mere thought. Before he could even attempt to compose himself, the sovereign spoke a second time. To pass the final level, you must acquire my approval. If you do, then you will become my successor disciple, and will be given my legacy treasure. When he spoke the word approval, it was as if the power of natural law and the forces of time itself were at play. To Bai Xiaochun, it felt as if time were being stretched out, causing everything to slow down. This sovereign is so powerful. Bai Xiaochun's eyes were wide with nervousness and incredulity. If he were facing an Archean, he might be able to compose himself, but this was a sovereign, and at the moment, he barely had the strength to keep standing. His eyes were completely bloodshot, not from excitement, but because he was subconsciously rotating his cultivation base to resist the pressure. Under such circumstances, most cultivators would not be able to pay attention to the words being spoken to them, but in this case, the shocking power of the sovereign's voice forced its way into Bai Xiaochun's mind. If you do not gain my approval, then you will be buried here. As the words were spoken, brightly colored light flashed in heaven and earth, and winds blew, carrying the howling of innumerable dead souls. As all of this happened, the image of the sovereign continued to approach Bai Xiaochun, striding slowly through the air, causing everything in the area to shake violently, and black lightning to crash without cease. The corpses you see around you are from the time before the Great War of the Starry Sky began. They belong to others who rose to the challenge but failed. Not a single one of them earned my approval. With the wave of my finger, they died, and became the flesh, blood, and spiritual power that operates my legacy fan. As the sovereign strode through the corpses, his features became clearer. He was middle-aged, incredibly handsome, with eyes that seemed to contain the starry sky itself. A single look from him seemed more than enough to cause all living souls to cower. Many years have passed since the War of the Starry Sky was fought. You are the first person to reach this point since then. And now, I must ask you a question. Are you ready? By this point, the image of the sovereign was standing right in front of Bai Xiaochun. He looked like a mountain that could crush any starry sky, and left Bai Xiaochun feeling like nothing more than an insect. The pressure and energy on display here was the type that could look disdainfully at anything in creation. With a mere thought, it could crush the life out of all creation. And that energy seemed to be waiting for Bai Xiaochun's response, before swallowing him up. As far as Bai Xiaochun was concerned, only an idiot would respond that he was ready. After all, in the face of this raging energy, the only outcome seemed to be certain death. Even as he began to speak, a sensation of imminent crisis filled him, and he shook his head firmly. I'm not ready. The sovereign's eyes glittered, and the spirit automaton looked over at him, blinking. Then, a look of absolutely unprecedented joy filled the spirit automaton's face. Oh right. He doesn't know that this level. Intense rumbling sounds filled the area as teleportation power sprang up, grabbing Bai Xiaochun and removing him from the level. Moments later, he was out of the 100th level and back on the surface of the damaged fan, gasping for breath and wiping the sweat from his brow. He felt like a mortal, not even strong enough to grab a chicken, much less face the brutal energy he had just sensed. That was scary, he thought. He had obviously been frightened, but it seemed that anyone who was forced to face the furious energy of that sovereign would make the same choice. But if I don't pass this level, then all the other levels will have been a big waste. He sat down cross-legged to wrestle with the matter for a bit. Finally, he gritted his teeth. The fan has been looking for an owner for years and years. Seems like the projection of that sovereign is probably getting pretty anxious about the matter. Maybe he'll take it easy on me. Having reached this point in his train of thought, he took a deep breath and headed back into the level. As soon as he entered, the image of the sovereign rose to his feet, energy raging as he stepped forward and said the exact same things he had said before. Just as Bai Xiaochun was opening his mouth to respond, the sovereign extended his hand, causing the tempestuous, destructive energy to surge around Bai Xiaochun. All of a sudden, Bai Xiaochun was certain that he was going to die. Shaking physically, he said, still not ready yet. I'll come again later. What do I do? What do I do? Days passed, and Bai Xiaochun was still sitting in the main square on the damaged fan, looking anxiously at the spot to enter the 100th level. Despair ate at his heart, despair at the fact that he had no chance at passing the 100th level. This is ridiculous. How are you supposed to pass the 100th level when it's so hard? You definitely have to be an Archean. But then again, even an Archean would probably be killed. And yet, here I am. He tugged at his hair, his eyes bloodshot and growing increasingly crimson. Eventually, he slapped his bag of holding to summon a few jugs of alcohol and began to drink. He drank for 3 days straight. He hemmed and hawed, occasionally pacing back and forth, occasionally sitting there dejectedly. At a certain point, the spirit automaton showed up, sat down in front of him, and joined him in sighing. Whenever he stood up as if to make another attempt at a challenge, the spirit automaton would say something along the lines of, "Even I'm not sure why the exalted sovereign did things this way. I've been wanting a new master for a long time, you know. You have no idea what it's been like to see so many people die in such horrific and painful fashion." Sometimes he would tell stories. I remember one time when someone came along with an incredible fleshly body and terrifying powers of regeneration. I definitely thought that he would become my new master. But guess what happened? Bam! The sovereign smashed him into a bloody pulp. Oh, the humanity. The more Bai Xiaochun heard such stories, the jumpier he got. It was truly horrific. Blood was splashing everywhere, and then there was this sort of popping sound as his head exploded. The spirit automaton's sighs echoed about constantly as he gave very serious advice. You know, Bai Xiaochun, I was really hoping that we might end up becoming friends after all of the squabbling. But from the bottom of my heart, I urge you not to throw your life away. That would be meaningless. I'm actually starting to get the feeling that the sovereign doesn't want me to have a new master. The old fart. Whatever. The most important thing is that you stay alive. You might not be able to pass the 100th level, but at least you have some authority with the fan. We can work together. Don't worry, I'll help you do whatever you need. After 3 days, Bai Xiaochun was fairly drunk, and the spirit automaton was jabbering about how terrifying the 100th level was. Suddenly, Bai Xiaochun put his alcohol jug down and looked over at the spirit automaton. "Since when did you become so considerate?" he asked. "I've always been this way," the spirit automaton replied in dead earnest. Sounding like the epitome of righteousness, he said, "You think I was doing all that just to make things hard for you? Wrong. I was trying to save you. I don't want the old fart to get his way and kill you. I want you to live. That way I'll have someone to chat with. You have no idea what it's like to be me. I've been here for so many tens of thousands of years that I've already lost track of time. It's so lonely." He sighed again, a bitter look in his eyes as he stared off into the distance, but at the same time, peered cautiously at Bai Xiaochun out of the corner of his eye. Bai Xiaochun, tipsy, looked over at the spirit automaton, and realized that something definitely seemed suspicious. Suddenly, he shot to his feet, and then pretended to let out a stream of uproarious laughter. "You're trying to pull a fast one," he said. "You don't want me to go into the 100th level, do you?" Startled, the spirit automaton leapt to his feet. "I'm not lying. You absolutely, positively must not go into that level. I don't want you to die." Upon seeing the spirit automaton's reaction, Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered, more suspicious than ever. Snorting coldly, he began to walk toward the fan rib. "I see through your little scheme," he said loudly, picking up his pace as he headed forward. The spirit automaton was so nervous that he was about to cry. Scrambling after Bai Xiaochun, he bitterly said, "You have to believe me. Don't do this. I don't want to lose you." Why won't you trust me? I have your best interests at heart." The more the spirit automaton babbled, the more suspicious Bai Xiaochun got. He also kept moving faster until he was right outside of the 100th level. There, he lifted up his foot as if to step into the level. Turning, he glared and said, "Tell me the truth, you little automaton. The level's fake, isn't it?" The spirit automaton's heart seized momentarily, and he stood there blankly, looking as if he might start crying at any moment. When Bai Xiaochun saw how he was standing there seemingly at a loss for words, his mood instantly improved. Stepping down, he vanished, to reappear within the 100th level. Everything happened exactly the same as before, with shocking energy filling the area, as well as a destructive, murderous aura. The sudden pressure sobered him up significantly, whereupon he shivered in fear and began to wail inwardly. Was the spirit automaton really comforting me? Or is he actually trying to get me killed? Damn it, I'm not really going to be stymied by the last level, am I? Feeling like he was going crazy, he watched as the projection of the sovereign approached, causing the entire world to tremble. "Challenger, are you ready?" As the world trembled, Bai Xiaochun's eyes turned completely bloodshot. He knew that if he chickened out again, not only would it be much harder for him to reach the Archean realm, but it would also be highly unlikely that anyone would become the rightful owner of the fan. He had worked very hard to reach this point. And all the while, the cultivators from the Heavenspan realm were suffering. Thinking back to what had happened in the Imperial Palace, he suddenly threw caution to the wind and shouted, "Bring it on." Pulling out the turtle walk, which had returned to him of its own accord after the previous level, he put it on his head. "I'm ready, fool." The sovereign's eyes flickered as he looked at Bai Xiaochun and then extended his hand. Bai Xiaochun immediately unleashed the full power of his cultivation base and fleshly body, and prepared to fight back against the sovereign. However, it was in completely unexpected fashion that the sovereign merely reached out and bopped the turtle walk. And then, there was no tempest. There was no surge of energy. There were no fluctuations. After bopping the turtle walk, a very serious expression overtook the sovereign's face, and he nodded. "Well, since you're ready, then you pass. Congratulations. You are my successor. Many years have passed since the War of the Starry Sky, and this projection of mine is already growing very weak. The time has come to leave. Treat Xiao Kai well. I hope that, as my successor, you can tread the path that I never walked to the end. Remember my name. I was a sovereign of the immortal world. Zhou Chen." The projection of the sovereign smiled faintly at him, then turned, floated up into the sky, and faded away into nothing. Bai Xiaochun stood there in a bit of a daze, the turtle walk still perched on his head. The sovereign was gone, but for some reason, he felt like he was in a dream. It seemed completely unreal. He even looked around a bit, and then down at himself to make sure he was real. After confirming that he was in fact standing there, he felt even more confused. Huh? I passed, just like that? I won? Feeling very uncertain about the whole thing, he cautiously left the level and returned to the fan rib. As he did, countless fluctuating streams of bright light shot up from the fan and flowed directly toward him. As they fused with him, his fluctuations of control over the fan erupted out in all directions. The two sets of fluctuations instantly formed some sort of resonance, causing all of the levels in the fan ribs to unlock, and filling him with the sensation that a single thought on his part could control the entire fan. Chest heaving, he finally came to the realization that he really had passed the 100th level. If he wanted, he could change the direction the fan flew in. It was under his complete control. His heart surged with nearly uncontrollable excitement at all of the powers of the fan that he now had at his disposal. The little automaton really was trying to pull a fast one. All of a sudden, he shouted in a loud voice, "All right, little automaton, get the hell out here. Lord Bai wants to talk." Bai Xiaochun had been waiting for a long time to say those words. Although he could have uttered them in the past, he hadn't dared to. Knowing how petty the spirit automaton was, he knew that provoking him could be very dangerous. But now he didn't care at all. He had become the owner of the fan, and had absolute control. Now, he could revel in his role as the master anytime he wished. It felt wonderful to yell in such a fashion. It was like being able to drink a big cup of cold water on a hot, sweaty day. Swishing his sleeve, he raised his voice even further and shouted, "Hurry up. What are you stalling for? Lord Bai wants to talk." As his voice echoed back and forth through the damaged fan, the spirit automaton was crouching on a distant fan rib, cradling his head in his hands, tugging at his hair, his face a mask of bitterness. Unfortunately, it didn't matter whether he wanted to or not, he had to listen to Bai Xiaochun. Invisible forces made it so. Sighing, he turned and flew over toward him. As he did, he changed his appearance, transforming into a charming boy, the type who anyone would like right off the bat. Bai Xiaochun was not very pleased with the dilly-dallying, and snorted coldly when he finally caught sight of the spirit automaton approaching. The spirit automaton shivered, and tried to put on the most fawning expression possible, mixed in with a bit of nervousness. Coming to a stop in front of Bai Xiaochun, he clasped hands and bowed his head. "Greetings, Master. I'm not pleased with this look of yours," Bai Xiaochun said primly. Before, he had always dealt with the spirit automaton in divine sense form. But now, he was here in physical form, making it the first time Bai Xiaochun had actually seen him in person. He looked fair and delicate, even more so than Bai Xiaochun himself. In response to Bai Xiaochun's words, tears began to stream down the spirit automaton's face as he did his best to look humiliated, but not willing to talk back. The truth was that he really was scared. After all, he had definitely offended Bai Xiaochun on a very deep level. "Master, the spirit automaton was about to launch into some flattering words, but before he could, Bai Xiaochun cleared his throat loudly. Eyes glittering, he looked the spirit automaton up and down and then said, "The time has come to tell your new master what your name is." Go ahead. Bai Xiaochun couldn't keep from chuckling darkly. He had the feeling that he was going to be very pleased with where this conversation was going. The spirit automaton's face blanched as surely as if he had choked on some food. After a long moment passed, he managed to gurgle, "My name, well, it's Xiao Kai." Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but laugh uproariously in response. Clasping his hands behind his back, he stuck his chin up and grandly went on to say, "I mean your surname too. Speak up, what's your full name?" "My surname is Xiao," the spirit automaton replied in a low voice, looking completely crushed. Chuckling, Bai Xiaochun said, "From now on, your surname is Bai. Come, say your new name really loud." The spirit automaton hesitated at first, but considering how Bai Xiaochun was just standing there laughing, he started to get mad and said, "You. Fudge. Fine, who cares if my surname is Bai now? Just call me Bai Xiaochi." At this point, Bai Xiaochun's resentment toward the spirit automaton began to fade. Snorting coldly, he began to stroll toward the fan ribs. "Very well, Bai Xiaochi. Please give your new master a little tour of this damaged fan." Overall, Bai Xiaochun seemed very pleased with the spirit automaton's new name. HMPH, he thought. Who forced you to offend me so much before? Bai Xiaochun was feeling wonderful, but Bai Xiaochi was crestfallen and on the verge of tears. This was exactly what he had hoped so dearly to avoid. Ever since he had sworn that oath, he had feared what would happen if Bai Xiaochun succeeded, and then forced him to change his surname. Although, it could have been worse. Now the calamity had come and gone, and he could only sigh in despair, then lead Bai Xiaochun around and introduce the damaged fan to him. Of course, he immediately began to do the worst job possible. Sadly for him, he had once again underestimated Bai Xiaochun, who could tell exactly what he was doing. "Listen here, Bai Xiaochi," he said. "Do a good job, make me happy, and I might give you your old surname back." Bai Xiaochi's eyes went wide, and he began to pant. Back when he had been fighting against Bai Xiaochun, the automaton had seemed like a clever individual. But the truth was that, now that Bai Xiaochun had become his master, there was nothing he could do to fight back against him. And although he didn't quite trust Bai Xiaochun's character very much, there was no way to tell if he would follow through, and eventually change his surname back. Suddenly finding a new reason for hope and passion, he began to enthusiastically introduce everything about the fan. "Master, this legacy fan has a total of 108 fan ribs, each of which are filled with various rewards. If you want them, they'll appear in front of you instantly. Of course, the rewards are like that, but not the entities which exist within the levels. Those are shared between all the levels. For example, there are only a limited number of souls. Oh, right, now that you're the owner of the fan, you are free to seek enlightenment of the exalted sovereign's Tao essence of life and death. Generally speaking, once your cultivation base is high enough, you'll be able to use all of the fan's shocking powers and abilities. This fan surpasses what people call a world treasure. It's a starry sky treasure. When it flies through the starry sky, it can shake heaven and earth to the point where ghosts and gods weep. The most powerful divine ability of the fan is housed in the fan face itself." Bai Xiaochun felt quite smug and complacent as he listened to the introduction. He couldn't have been prouder of how swimmingly he had handled the fan's automaton. It had taken minimal effort. Punish firmly, but offer a reward in the end, he thought, reveling in the circumstances. That's my motto. As for Bai Xiaochi, he paid close attention to Bai Xiaochun's reactions, and would quickly add more information whenever it seemed appropriate. Even more outrageous, he actually floated up and began to massage Bai Xiaochun's neck and shoulders. When Bai Xiaochun realized how obedient he was acting, and saw the fawning expression on his face, he sighed even more deeply. When the image on the fan face was brought up, Bai Xiaochun looked over at it. Before, he had only been able to observe it from a distance, but now, when he stood on the fan rib and looked at it, it was almost as if he were drawn into the picture itself. The river, the mountain, and everything else, seemed to resonate with each other. There was also the boat in the river, upon which two men sat playing Go. There was also the palace in the river, and the sovereign arm floating in the sky. Bai Xiaochun couldn't have been in higher spirits. "Master, once your cultivation base is high enough, you will be able to create projections of the items in the fan face. For example, that boat is actually a world treasure. And the two men sitting there playing Go are actually Archean slaves. See that mountain? It was created by the Tao essence of the exalted sovereign. And that river is no ordinary river. One drop from it can transform into another mighty river wherever it is placed. And there's more. Master, remember how much I wanted to use the power of that sovereign's arm before? Master, if you just send your mind into the damaged fan, you'll be able to see what you can do with it now." Curious, Bai Xiaochun closed his eyes and sent his mind into the fan. Almost immediately, he began to pant. To his shock, he could sense that, somewhere else in the void, there was another damaged fan, heading in his direction. The other half of the damaged fan, he exclaimed, opening his eyes. Exactly, Bai Xiaochi replied excitedly. Considering how fast it's going, it won't be long before the two meet each other. When they combine, then the fan will be whole again. If only one half of the fan is this powerful, Bai Xiaochun thought, then no one would ever dare to provoke me if I had the entire thing. Such thoughts immediately had him feeling more daring and heroic than ever. Bai Xiaochi provided a thorough tour and explanation of all the functions of the fan. During the process, Bai Xiaochun personally visited the mountain in the image on the fan face, atop which was a towering pagoda, filled with the aura of the Tao essence of life and death. It was a 9-story pagoda, the top floor of which actually contained that Tao essence of life and death. Unfortunately, Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base wasn't high enough to permit him to enter that level. He could only reach as high as the 4th. Even in that 4th floor, though, his progress when practicing cultivation vastly surpassed other locations on the fan, or in the eternal immortal domains. When he sat cross-legged in meditation for the time it takes an incense stick to burn, his entire body filled with burning heat. As it turned out, thanks to the stimulation of the Tao essence of life and death, his cultivation base power increased as much in that short period of time as it normally would in an entire month. This is a holy land of cultivation, he exclaimed. Off to the side, Bai Xiaochi obsequiously said, "My lord, once you've reached the late celestial realm, you'll be able to enter the 5th floor. Once you're an Archean, you'll be able to enter the top floor, and contact the Tao essence of life and death directly. At that point, your cultivation will go even faster." Excited by the prospect, Bai Xiaochun did some more cultivation, until his cultivation base and battle prowess were far stronger than before. Finally, he left. After taking a walk around the fan, he once again tried to use the power of his cultivation base to take control of the images in the fan face, and the divine abilities they could unleash. Unfortunately, he couldn't budge the mountain, or the river. However, the requirements to use the boat didn't seem as high, and after some work, he managed to get it to tremble slightly. Even the two men playing Go inside of it twitched. Although he couldn't fully summon in outside of the fan face, he was still pleased with the progress he had made. It felt wonderful to be the true owner of the damaged fan. Even better were all of the treasures and medicinal pills he had access to now. A mere thought on his part caused numerous such items to fly out of the fan and into his hand. At this point, he thought back to some of the strange things he had encountered in the various levels, such as the dark concoctors, or the level filled with souls. Blurring into motion, he headed into the level that contained the dark concoctors. As soon as he appeared, the dark concoctors sensed his presence, and looked up to see a figure that had haunted their nightmares ever since they first met him. Immediately, screams began to rise into the air. Heavens! It's him, the arch-nemesis of the dark concoctors. Impossible! How could he have come back? Didn't we banish him already? When Bai Xiaochun saw the dark concoctors trembling in terror, he threw his head back and laughed uproariously. There was no way he would simply let such natural-born medicine concoctors off the hook. Using his authority and powers with the fan, he very easily forced them to submit. The dark concoctors agreed to his demands. Scowling on the verge of tears, they began to concoct medicine in exactly the way he demanded. Next, he went to the level filled with souls, and quickly cleared it out. Long ago, Bai Xiaochi had claimed that he couldn't take those souls. Bai Xiaochun had then taken that to mean that he would just have to acquire them on his own. Bai Xiaochi stood off to the side, watching Bai Xiaochun plundering the fan with seeming ease. Although his spirit automaton's heart dripped with figurative blood, he didn't let even a hint of that show on his face. He simply looked on. Clearing his throat, Bai Xiaochun said, "Don't look at me like that. It's a big waste to leave these souls sitting here doing nothing. There's no way I'm going to let them feed on any more of the spiritual energy powering the fan." Looking like the picture of righteousness, he sat down cross-legged and began to practice more cultivation using the medicinal pills he had just acquired. Half a month went by. Having just become the new owner of the fan, Bai Xiaochun was in extremely high spirits, and was enthralled with the various functions and abilities of the fan. Most of his time was spent either practicing cultivation, or doing research into 23-colored flame. Unfortunately, he didn't have a huge stockpile of souls anymore, but he had enough to work with temporarily. He eventually reached the point of being confident enough to do some tests. Although there were no successes, the failures gave him plenty of new insights, and he was gaining confidence in an imminent success. As Bai Xiaochun was immersed in his activities on the damaged fan, something happened in Vile Emperor City that was profoundly shocking to all cultivators from the Heavenspan realm. Earlier, everything had been calm. The Vile Prince had kept very low-key and hadn't seemed interested in Bai Xiaochun at all. The Vile Emperor was in secluded meditation. But the truth was that the Vile Prince had been working on a huge plan targeting the river-defying sect. Patriarch Spirit Stream and his allies had slowly been recruiting more and more cultivators to their cause, and even though Big Fatty Zhang was doing his best to keep it all a secret, their presence was finally made known. Before, the Vile Prince hadn't been confident enough to make a move on them. But now, his patience had reached an end. Furthermore, even after refining the Arch-Emperor into a new arm for himself, he was still unable to perform spirit enhancements. The Vile Prince was going crazy in his thirst for spirit enhancement blood. And therefore, he had spent the last few months secretly surrounding the river-defying sect. If the sect had been located in the Saint Emperor dynasty, he wouldn't have dared to make a move. But since it was in the Vile Emperor dynasty, things were much simpler. Even still, he knew that when he made his move, he had to strike like lightning. He arranged for some celestials to help him, which ensured that the river-defying sect forces were powerless to resist him. When he finally made his move, they couldn't even fight back. They were instantly captured. The news shook the entire Vile Emperor dynasty. And what was even more astonishing was the subsequent announcement made by the Vile Prince that he was setting up a massive spell formation in one of the plains outside of Vile Emperor City. Trapped within the spell formation were all of the cultivators from the river-defying sect, as well as other Heavenspan realm cultivators who had been imprisoned earlier. There were tens of thousands in total. All of them were sealed, and incapable of escaping the spell formation which, once fully activated, would extract their blood. The Vile Prince himself wouldn't oversee the operation, but rather, Celestial Deadfall and Reverend Devourer. It was shocking news, especially to the Heavenspan cultivators scattered in the Saint Emperor dynasty. All of them were immediately enraged. Vile Prince. Song Ke had just been preparing to go meet up with the river-defying sect, and was relatively close to Vile Emperor City. When he heard about what was happening, his eyes began to burn with madness and killing intent, and he instantly powered up his cultivation base. He had been a lone wolf for years now, and had slaughtered countless enemies. Because of that, and because of the cultivation resources he had acquired over the years, his cultivation base had long since broken through to the late Diva realm. However, because of his murderous aura, he was confident that he could actually fight a demigod. Years of enlightenment regarding the Tao of slaughter and killing made him seem like a razor-sharp sword dripping with blood. Without any hesitation, he began to speed in the direction of Vile Emperor City. It was at that exact same moment that, back on the damaged fan, Bai Xiaochun finally conjured a 23-colored flame. Feeling very pleased with himself, he left the fan and returned to his private chamber in the embassy in Vile Emperor City. As soon as he materialized, he noticed that his transmission jade slip was vibrating loudly. Because of how far away the damaged fan was, he couldn't receive transmitted messages. But now, all of the messages came in, and when he saw them, his face flickered dramatically. Heart-pounding with a sense of profound unease, he sent his divine sense into the jade slip. Virtually all of the messages were from Big Fatty Zhang. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.